Hi geographers, welcome to your Cat Help session video for this week. For water and carbon cycles, you've got a 20 marker. The question says, human activity has a significant impact on flows of water in tropical rainforests. With reference to a tropical rainforest you have studied, to what extent do you agree with this view? What we're going to do is going to put together a little bit of a plan here that you can use to help you structure this answer. It's probably worth us unpicking the question a little bit more before we start. So first off, thinking about perhaps what we mean by human activity. In the context of rainforests, deforestation is obviously going to be an important aspect here. But other activities might be relevant as well, things like agriculture and urbanisation or water abstraction. Human activity has a significant impact. So this is really about us weighing up how much of an impact that we think human activity has. Notice that it doesn't say either positive or negative here. So we're just thinking about the relative size of that impact. Flows of water is important here. So we're thinking about the movement or transfers or flows of water within the water cycle. We're not thinking about stores of water, but we're thinking about the flows. And obviously we have to make reference to a tropical rainforest that you've studied. In our case, that's the Amazon. And we have to be presenting a viewpoint about the extent to which we agree or not with this viewpoint. So let's start now by thinking about a structure that we might use to answer this question. First thing we should always do in a 20-mark question is have an introduction. Now, within our intro, we want to do a couple of things. We want to unpick the key terminology. In this case, that's going to be things like examples of human activity. It's going to include things like what we mean by the flows of water. And we might also kind of set the scene in terms of our case study. So a little bit of context about the Amazon rainforest. Doesn't need masses of detail here, but maybe just a couple of sentences giving some context to human activity within the Amazon. And then we might also just finally state our viewpoint. Now, with this in mind, it's really important to consider a kind of seesaw or a set of scales where we've got agree on one side and we've got disagree on the other side. And we want to think about which way our scales are tipped and how much they are tipped one way or another. We should never end up in this situation where we're sort of completely sitting on the fence and it's completely balanced. We want to tip one way or the other. So really, you are going to come to the idea of either strongly or partially agreeing or disagreeing with that statement. It's probably the first thing you need to do is pause the video now and decide for yourself where your opinion lies on that seesaw. Then we can probably launch into the main body of our essay. Okay, so we're looking to make probably 3 points here, and in each of our points we want to do the same sort of thing. So we might want to first off kind of identify a human action, and as I said before, e.g. deforestation or agriculture are going to be significant drivers of changes in the Amazon. We then want to think about explaining the impact it has on particular flows. So, for example, whether it's affecting interception, whether it's affecting runoff, whether it's affecting evapotranspiration, whether it's affecting infiltration, There's lots of examples of flows that we could talk about. What you might also want to do within this answer is actually think about some of the links between some of these flows. As we know, the water cycle operates as a system. So something that affects infiltration may well go on to affect runoff, or evapotranspiration might have impacts on precipitation and so on. So you want to explore some of the links. Ideally, you also want to be able to provide some evidence of the impact. Okay, so in this context, I want to know things like how much does something change? Okay, so if you're telling me, for example, that an area that experiences deforestation might in turn then experience a decline in rainfall, well, you need to be able to back up that point with some evidence, be able to give me some kind of ideas of the context of those changes. Okay, so you want to try and do this for kind of 2 or 3 actions, or looking at 2 or 3 points dealing with some of these changes. While you're going through that, as I said earlier, you want to be thinking about some of those links. Perhaps what you might also want to do is be kind of weighing up as you go along. So, for example, you might argue that one particular human action has a greater influence than another, or you might argue that human activity has more of an impact on some flows than others. Either way, you want to try and follow that sort of structure within your paragraph. Make sure there's explanation in there. You want to be able to explain how flows are affected, and make sure there's some evidence in there as well. Final thing then would be your conclusion at the end of your answer. Okay, so your conclusion needs to do 2 things. It needs to summarize the main points of your essay. For example, can you kind of condense each point that you've made in the main body into maybe 1 sentence? Try and get across the main ways in which human activity is affecting flows within the water cycle. You want to then make sure that you come back to restate your viewpoint. We're going to use our viewpoint to kind of sandwich our argument together. And you might even then go on to be a little bit more specific in terms of picking out the most significant impact or activity. And what's quite a sophisticated thing to do is to try and think of a little twist in your conclusion as well. So, for example, one of the things that you might be able to look at in the context of this are actually attempts to reduce deforestation, and then think about how that links to the impact of human activity. Does that turn it more to be a positive rather than a negative impact on those flows within the water cycle? Do we think to some extent that damage is reversible if we can reduce the rates of deforestation? So that's the sort of structure that you want to follow. You want to make sure that you're using your notes so that you can go back, particularly with regards to that evidence. You're going to need to look into your notes to find some of the facts and figures associated with this case study. And as we've said before, in terms of the amount that you should be writing, we're looking for 2+ sides handwritten, or if you're typing it, 1 side typed but in a reasonable size font, like a size 11 font. Anything bigger than that, and it's not really reflecting the amount of space or time that you would have to answer this question properly. So have a go at that and let us know if you've got any problems.